So in case you have not noticed, the next president is going to inherit a few tricky foreign conflicts that are going on right now. The two most pressing ones to United States citizens probably are, of course, we're approaching the one-year anniversary of Hamas's attack on October 7th in Israel. So Israel's war with Gaza, the Hamas inside of Gaza, as well as they've shifted focus to Hezbollah on their north in Lebanon. So, this is obviously a proxy war with Iran, who's funding and controlling both of those terrorist organizations. So we should talk a little bit about that. Beyond that, we are nearly 3 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's on the mind because Zelensky just visited. So we'll talk about his visit and some of the controversy around that. So we'll take an episode just to catch you up on what's going on in foreign affairs because, the president is going to have to deal with these things. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. I appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with me today. Glad that you are here. So yeah, we want to get caught up on some of these things. Look, I am not a foreign policy expert. Requires a lot of reading. There's a lot of nuance. I do love specifically reading and listening to people that are in those countries specifically. There is something I would suggest doing for sure is finding some news sources that have either someone embedded there as a reporter or, one like Dispatch, the guy that does their podcast producing, Adam, is in Israel. So they go to him a lot for some perspective of, actual people inside of Israel who are dealing with this on a daily basis. And it's a unique perspective because a lot of times I feel like we just get the top line bullet points. It's really easy to be disconnected from that. I know it is for me, at least. It's very hard to understand what's going on in these foreign conflicts when I don't live in that area myself. And I think we try to boil everything down to these really simple it goes along with how we do politics now. Everything has to be very black and white. I feel like everything has to be one side or the other. And war is just not like that. There's a lot of nuance in war. There's a lot of details that really, really matter. And it's not as easy to go good guy, bad guy. It's not as easy to go, this is correct, that's incorrect. It's really easy to play Monday morning quarterback with war games, obviously. I don't see as much of that because I don't think people are that audacious to pretend they're smart enough to think they're better than generals in these armies and stuff. So the point is, this stuff does matter, and it is something worth paying attention to, but it is uniquely kind of hard sometimes as an American to do so when we're so caught up in kind of all of our crap. And we are very connected to both these conflicts that are going on, both with Israel and the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And there's obviously a lot of potential for other conflicts too. Some people theorize that we're already in World War III because, again, even with history, sometimes we try to oversimplify what's going on and how World War I started, for example, or how World War II started. And a lot of times we just get the history book version that's very simplified. Well, X happened, and then Y happened, and then we were in World War I. But the truth is, both of those world wars were very, very complicated. The climate that was going on at the time, different countries, different regions, different conflicts, different enemies of my enemies being my friend kind of situations. And so, some people theorize we were sort of in World War I before what would be considered the official start date of World War I. Same thing with World War II. Some people really don't even think there's really even a gap between the two of them because everything that happened in World War I and the aftermath of it is what led to Germany starting World War II. And so history is complicated. War is complicated. These kind of conflicts are very complicated. I'm not going to pretend I know all the answers. I'm not going to pretend to be your authority on that stuff. I just feel like let's talk about the bullet points. Let's talk about the things that are important, the things that are being asked of us, because I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind is that Israel and Ukraine are both asking us for help in those conflicts. So they're asking us for help with mostly just weapons. People, I think, are misunderstanding some of our involvement in these conflicts. And right now, it is weapons. Sometimes those weapons come with strings attached of you can do this with these weapons. You cannot do these with these weapons. I think that's our prerogative. I think that's okay for us to do that. That being said, there are some times when I think we are hamstringing our allies by doing so. So, like I said, not an expert. I read a lot of people that are smarter than me on this. I highly suggest you do so. I'm going to put a ton of links in the show notes for this one. So feel free to dive in and read some stuff. There's a lot of stuff from the Dispatch in there because they have an embedded reporter as well as a Dom who is on the ground, lives in Israel, like I mentioned. Stuff from National Review too. Semaphore is a good one with some foreign policy stuff locally, the Free Press. So I'm putting a lot of links in the notes. If you want to read all this stuff, by all means, go for it. I would highly suggest doing so. So let's get caught up on Israel first, because I think it's the more complicated and honestly more exciting one right now. There's been a lot going on in the last couple weeks. The truth is, by the time I release this today, I'm recording this Wednesday, it will release a little later today. Some of this might be even outdated because Israel's been on the sort of offensive for the last week and a half or so against Hezbollah in Lebanon to their north. I'm saying Lebanon because it's not the right way to pronounce it. I'm sorry. I have this weird thing. My great aunt, who is no longer alive, was sort of, I'm trying to think of the nice way to say it. She was very educated and she loved to correct people and talk about world politics and stuff like that. But she always said Lebanon. And my brother does a much better impression of her saying Lebanon. So now that's just stuck in my head and that's how I say it instead of Lebanon. I'm sorry. So it's going to jump back and forth between actually pronouncing it correctly and saying Lebanon like an Okie. So apologies for that. And a shout out to my great Aunt Kay for pronouncing it that way and getting it stuck in my head. It's really my brother's impression that's doing it to me. So let's talk about this. So, you know, we know about the Hamas thing. We know about the Gaza. That conflict is still going on. It does not appear that there's any sort of ceasefire coming on that. It does not. Seems like every time that Hamas comes forward, by the way this is being negotiated is not really directly with Israel and Hamas, like getting at a table and talking. This is all mediated through third parties in Qatar or Qatar. You can pronounce that one either way. I have looked that one up. And so we're involved in that too. And basically every time that Biden or the State Department comes out and says, hey, I think we're close to getting a deal. Here's what Hamas wants and we're willing to give that to them. Hamas says no deal on a ceasefire. To me, it's pretty clear that there's nothing that they could do other than short of Israel ceasing to exist. So if Israel agrees to no longer exist, sounds like Hamas will take that ceasefire deal. But maybe not even then, because they'd still like to kill a bunch of Jews, because that's what they want to do. That's, specifically, they want to destroy Israel, kill all the Jews. It's pretty hard to negotiate with people that have that top line demand. So really not a lot going on there, although Israel has just kind of crushed Hamas in those situations in Gaza and has done a lot of work on, but it's still very hard to eliminate Hamas completely from Gaza. It just is. Don't really know what the follow-up to, if they do eliminate Hamas, is for Gaza. We don't know what will become of those people who will, be their leaders, because Hamas actually does control that entire region. So there's a lot of questions there on the Hamas side. However, things have heated up on the north side. If you're not familiar with Israel, and I should have probably gotten a map for the people that are watching it, but for the sake of audio, I'll just explain in case you're not familiar with the layout of Israel. So Israel's surrounded by people who, for the most part, hate them, okay? So to the north of them is Lebanon, and Lebanon's fine as a country, except that is where Hezbollah, which is an Iran-backed proxy, and by far the biggest proxy. I mean, this is the crown jewel of Iran's proxy war kind of stuff. These are not the JV team. This is not, I mean, even though that's a bit of a joke because that's what Obama called ISIS, who's clearly also not the JV team, but these guys are legitimately not the B team at all. Okay, so they were founded, Hezbollah was founded in 1985 with the express purpose of course, killing Jews and eliminating Israel. So it's basically the most militarized and organized proxy that Iran has. They have over 100,000 soldiers. They have hundreds of thousands of rockets, estimated 200,000 rockets. And that's a lot if you're not familiar with, what Hamas was doing essentially, even though it's absolutely a security failure that it happened at all. What happened in Israel on October 7th last year is they got caught off guard. They did not think Hamas had the capability to do that kind of attack. They didn't think they had the weaponry. They didn't think they had the organization. To be fair, they sort of thought of them as the JV team compared to the real concern, which would be Hezbollah in the north. We'll get into some of that history in a second. So Israel's caught off guard on October 7th. But since then, there's been a constant rocket barrage coming from the north, coming from Hezbollah. enough so that it's moved 60 to 100,000 Israelis out of the north of Israel because it's become a conflict zone. So, this is how Israel's trying to survive. They're being attacked from Gaza, which is sort of on the west side of Israel, which is very confusing because the West Bank is not on the west side of Israel; it's on the west bank of the river. It's confusing, and so you've got Hamas that's sort of contained in some sort of way, but Hezbollah has been supporting Hamas essentially since their attack on October 7th by barraging Israel with missiles constantly. They've fired over 8,000 in the last year. So Israel's defenses catch most of those. Their Iron Dome thing shoots those out of the air for the most part, but a few have gotten through, okay? So this history, again, I've done an episode on sort of the history of some of the Israel stuff. Haven't really gone into a lot of the Hezbollah stuff. I'm not going to go deep into it here either, but just the brief bullet points. The last sort of open conflict with Hezbollah after, obviously they were founded in 1985. There's been a lot of founding. There's been a lot of fighting between there, but 2006 was the last time there was like a big conflict. And this happened after Hezbollah snuck into Israel and kidnapped 2 IDF soldiers and took them across the border into Lebanon. And so this started a war that lasted 34 days. And again, not a military strategist, Israel seemed to learn a lot from this conflict. They were doing mostly kind of air bombardment of Lebanon, and it didn't work out as well as they wanted. They lost a lot of soldiers. There were a lot of civilian casualties. It wasn't a great look. They've kind of totally changed the way they look at Hezbollah since then. They were a much bigger force to deal with than I think they thought they were going to be in 2006. So it ended with a UN brokering a peace deal that said they demilitarize the southern part of Lebanon that borders with Israel so that Hezbollah could not operate out of that area. Neither could Israel, essentially. So put a little bit of breathing room between the two countries. It's not, like I said, again, Lebanon, not enemies with Israel. However, Hezbollah is headquartered there, and there's 100,000 people that are controlling stuff, and it's a problem. Like, the Lebanese are not the bad guys in this situation. Unfortunately, they are the civilians, just like the Palestinians in Gaza are the civilians, who these terrorist organizations are hiding behind, and they're using as human shields of sorts. So anyway, UN was supposed to keep the peace in this region and keep it de-armed, right? It wasn't supposed to be able to be militarized at all. And so this is what that was supposed to look like. If you are watching, you can also, if you're on Spotify, you can pull this up, but I'll put it in the show notes. So there's this map of Israel, and there was this region of Lebanon between, that was supposed to be demilitarized. So that's what it was supposed to look like in 2006. It never really ended up looking like that, though, because this is what it looks like now. Okay, so this is October 8th through March 5th. This is showing all of the areas of operations that Hezbollah is using as attack things. They're right on the border, and some of them are even into Israel. This is why they've had to pull out people from the north of Israel. So 60 to 100,000 people are not in their homes currently in Israel. They're displaced because these rocket attacks are blowing up that north part of Israel, because that's where they can get in and get through and stuff. And not to mention they're actually being attacked. They're actually in that zone in Israel, okay? So UN did not do their job. I think it's very important to point out, because you will hear all sorts of condemnations coming from the UN on Israel's actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon and against Hamas in Gaza. And I just think it's kind of hypocritical, because the UN was supposed to be the peacekeeping people inside this zone where there was supposed to be no militarization, and they didn't do it immediately. And so they did not hold up their end of the bargain. You can have this peace deal, but if the UN doesn't do what they say they're going to do, and Hezbollah is now attacking Israel from right on their border and inside their border, whose fault is that? I think it's a fair question to ask, okay? So didn't happen. So back to today. So that's 2006. We get to today. Hezbollah has certainly fired rockets into Israel sporadically the entire time, from going back to the 2000s to now. But it significantly ramped up on October 7th, because after Hamas attacked, which, they're both Iranian proxies. So I'm assuming maybe Hezbollah didn't know that it was going to happen, but they certainly immediately kicked into gear of, yeah, we support that, and have fired 8,000 rockets, like I mentioned, into Israel since October 7th. So a few months ago, you might have heard on the news that a rocket struck a soccer field in Israel that killed 12 children. So I hear all the time when it comes to the conflict in Gaza, well, oh, what about the kids that die? What about the civilians that die? And I just want to be totally clear. War sucks and civilian casualties suck. I wish there was a way to, I mean, of course, I wish people just didn't fight over stupid crap, but it'd be great if there was a way to have no civilian casualties in war. That'd be fantastic. But there aren't. However, I just feel like it's very one-sided on the hearing where the casualties are. Like I said, Lebanon is not an occupied territory. This is not a place where Israel is occupying people. This is not some sort of stolen land or anything. There's not any of the situations where we talk about this sort of settler colonialism that people like to bring up, or pretending there's some sort of oppression going on inside of Gaza with Palestinians. Keep in mind, Israel's not been inside of Gaza since 2006 either. Okay, so they pulled out of both these places in 2006. So it's been almost 20 years since they were involved in Gaza at all, and they've not been involved in Lebanon at all, period. So Hezbollah's firing of rockets that kills 12 children, I just didn't see anything on my feed with leftists complaining about Hezbollah, a terrorist organization funded by Iran, killing 12 children in Israel. I just didn't hear the outcry about it like I did about any other thing that Israel does. So to me, if you are complaining about one side's actions and then the other side does a similar thing, although I wouldn't say they're similar at all, other than they're both attacks, but Hezbollahs are indiscriminate. They're firing rockets into civilian areas in Israel in hopes that they'll penetrate their defenses and blow something up and kill people. That's not what Israel's doing at all. We'll get to some of their recent fun stuff that they've been doing. So anyway, Hezbollah's been attacking relentlessly. At some point, probably after these 12 children died, Israel realizes that they're saying they want to escalate to de-escalate. They need to take the fight to Hezbollah instead of waiting for Hezbollah to do a bigger attack, an October 7th-like attack, because they'd be much more capable to pull that off than Hamas was. And Hamas did a lot of damage. They killed 1,200 people. It was awful. Hezbollah has way more capability. So they've decided to start going after Hezbollah. So they've killed some of their leaders. You may have also heard about a bomb that they planted inside an Iranian guard facility. So this is like a hotel of sorts, except it's ran by the Iranian guard. And so this would be the most secure place you could go if you're a terrorist, right? And after, I'm probably getting some of the, I'm not going to try to do any names or anything here, but after the president of Iran died in that helicopter crash, which does seem to be just a helicopter crash, Israel sort of knew, okay, we're going to be able to take advantage of this. People are going to go to his funeral. And so they took out a Hezbollah leader inside of this secure facility. They planted a bomb in there and then set it off when he was confirmed to be in the room. That is as precision a strike as you could ever do. It just killed that guy and I think his bodyguard. That's it. So the guy working for the terrorist and the terrorist, that is all who died in this so they snuck a bomb into this place guarded by the top tier Iranian guard and killed one of their proxy people. Okay. That's a pretty good operation. So Hezbollah's been pretty pissed about that. Iran's been pretty pissed about that. So that's sort of one thing that set it off. But we've had these other attacks on people. There was one inside of, there's been these attacks in other countries where Israel has surgically striked to take out Hezbollah leadership and Iranian National Guard. Is it National Guard? I don't know. Why am I getting things confused? But the point is they've been taking out these leaders because they feel like they need to take out the leaders, sow confusion and stuff. Inside of that, we see that in these escalations, I see more articles that are blaming Israel and saying this is they're starting this war. I think that's a ridiculous notion to take up because they've been attacked. They've had to evacuate 60 to 100,000 people from their homes in the north of Israel because of these rocket attacks. 8,000 rockets have been fired in. Frankly, we don't know what that's like in America. We've never had a rocket fired in our neighborhood ever. We've never had sirens going off where we have to get in a basement for rockets being fired overhead. So we just really have no idea what Israelis have to deal with on a daily basis. So I just want to make that totally clear. But like I said, there's 100,000 people that have been forced out of their homes. I haven't heard the outcry about that in American media as much as I feel like I should if they're our ally. And again, this is only because Hezbollah is barraging Israel with rocket attacks and blowing up people's homes. Okay. This is not military targets. This is not war strategy. This is trying to kill Israelis and Jews. That's what the purpose is. So Israel wants to get people back into that area, and they've just decided we're not just going to give up a chunk of our territory and not let people live there. So they started these attacks. I'm sure heard about the pager attack, which is maybe one of the craziest things I've ever heard of. Last week, I think it was Tuesday, in Lebanon, basically, Israel intercepted. We still don't know the details of how this worked. Hezbollah decided that Israel's intelligence was too good, and they were trying to get their soldiers to stop using cell phones. They wanted them to use pagers instead because there's some complicated stuff about how two-way communication works versus one-way communication like a pager does, and they thought it could be less tracked, essentially. So they start making these switch to pagers to get out information to their soldiers, essentially, right? Israel caught wind of this, or who knows what kind of spy game stuff is going on here. But there's one of two ways I've heard this, and like I said, still not totally confirmed. One way is that they actually created a pager manufacturing business that was licensed and creating legitimate pagers for people in the region, and basically got the contract for Hezbollah and then rigged their pagers with explosives. This is months ago. The pager orders were 5 or 6 months ago. So they've had these pagers ready to explode for months. And the original plan was that they were going to blow it up if Hezbollah attacked Israel, like with a full-on war on day one. That's what they would do, just to try to blow up their communication, which is obviously a legitimate war strategy. So there's one version that has them creating this pager company. Another version says they just intercepted the supply chain and laced these with explosives. I just want to be totally clear. Nothing was hacked and made to explode. There were some stories last week when this happened. Axios was one of them, who typically has pretty good information on this kind of thing, but they wrote this big article about like, oh, this is a scary time because now people are going to be able to hack your iPhone and blow it up. No. They placed explosives inside these pagers. So they blew up thousands of pagers. It injured thousands of people, killed a lot of people. There's some discrepancies on who they killed. Again, this was a situation where I had people in my comments going, this is a war crime. So again, please tell me how Israel strategically taking out very narrowly only people who are Hezbollah members. So these are those 100,000 people that are fighting for Hezbollah, soldiers, all these kind of things. They're the only ones that have pagers. These pagers were distributed by Hezbollah leadership. So you're only blowing up those people's pagers. They didn't indiscriminately blow up a bunch of people's pagers in Lebanon. The only pagers that blew up were members of Hezbollah who are fighting for Hezbollah, who are trying to kill Jews, who are trying to kill Israelis, who want to wipe Israel off the map, who work for Iran, okay? That's as strategic as you get. Yes, there were civilian casualties. Yes, there were kids that died. There were kids that picked up their dad's pager. To this, I would say, don't be a terrorist and you won't put your family in danger. No one's family was in danger unless they were a terrorist. So please tell me how this is a war crime. To me, if Israel does the least destructive thing possible, if they take all the different plans and they go, here's the one that we're going to do the most strategic, narrow strike ever, where we only blow up Hezbollah members' pagers and therefore cause a communication disruption and we kill a bunch of Hezbollah terrorists, this is a good thing, right? There's always going to be some collateral damage. But to me, even if there wasn't any collateral damage, Israel still gets the blame. Israel basically can't do the same things that other countries can do and get away with it. To me, that's anti-Semitism. I can't find another explanation for it if Israel can't do things that other countries are allowed to do to defend themselves. Rant over. So we had the pager attacks. Then at the funerals for some of those people who died in the pager attacks, the next day, they blew up walkie-talkies. So they'd also, we haven't heard this story yet, they somehow laced walkie-talkies that Hezbollah bought with explosives and then detonated those. They were also detonating things like intercoms in buildings. So these are all very strategically Hezbollah members whose stuff starts blowing up. I assume this causes a huge panic, and all of a sudden you have people meeting in person. And so last Friday, they attacked with a missile, of course, Hezbollah leadership, who were meeting, these top commanders were meeting under a civilian building in Beirut. So IDF blew it up, killed, I think, as many. They're claiming it was up to 11 commanders. Hezbollah and Iran are claiming otherwise. Either way, these have all been pretty successful, and I'm sure have scrambled Hezbollah in a lot of ways. And there have been 1,600 strikes since then against munitions storage areas that Israel knows about. So Israel knows about a lot of the places they store weapons. Just like Hamas, they store a lot of them in people's houses and civilian places, places that's a war crime, actually. And that's, to me, the thing that bothers me the most about this conflict is that I'm constantly hearing that Israel's committing genocide, or this is genocide, or that's a war crime. And I've not heard the same people tell me that Hezbollah is committing war crimes by hiding rockets in civilian houses in Lebanon. That's a war crime. You can't do that. Hiding weapons in hospitals, things like that. That's what Hezbollah is doing. That's what Hamas does. It's just interesting to me that the same rules don't apply to Hezbollah and Hamas as do to Israel. So Israel's trying to escalate to de-escalate. It's definitely escalating. That's for sure. So we'll see if it leads to de-escalation. We don't know. I'm not in charge of this. We'll just have to pay attention and see what happens. Obviously, Iran and Hezbollah would like to attack Israel back, and they've certainly been sending a lot of missiles in, and they've actually gotten a couple through. Very minimal damage, very minimal casualty inside of Israel. But, Israel is urging Lebanese civilians to evacuate southern Lebanon because they're saying, look, we are coming for the weapons. Get out of there. If you know you're somewhere where weapons are, I would get out of there if you're a civilian, because we are going to blow it up. But again, who does this in the world? Who telegraphs their military moves other than Israel to try to protect civilian casualties? Try to protect civilians from becoming casualties of this war. Israel's doing it. They're dropping leaflets. They're paging telephones. I mean, they're paging telephones. I don't know. They're sending messages out via text message. They're calling phones. They're in Gaza specifically. They were blowing up rockets above buildings as a warning that, hey, the building is next. If you are in a building where there was an explosion that happened over it, it's time to get out because the next one's going to take the building down. No one else does this in war. So to me, Israel's going much further than it has to be. Is Israel perfect? No. Do they make mistakes? Yes. Do they have bad strategy sometimes? Yes. Is their leadership possibly bad? Yes, maybe. These are all questions. These are all conversations we can have. Honestly, I think they're conversations that are more appropriate for people inside of Israel to have about their leadership and all that kind of stuff and holding those people accountable. I'm just looking at it from a calling balls and strikes kind of situation. And obviously, Israel is our ally, but we can call out our allies too if we think they're wrong. And I'm fine with having a discussion of, do we think this is the right policy? What is the solution in Gaza after they take out Hamas? Like, is there a two-state solution? What is the plan? I think these are all fine questions to ask. I would never accuse someone of being anti-Semitic if they're asking those questions or even being critical of Israel. All of that's fine. There are plenty of people inside of Israel that are critical of Israel. It's totally fine. Just like in America, there's plenty of people that are critical of our leadership. That doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic, okay? But if you say that Jews can't defend themselves the same way that everyone else can, you're anti-Semitic, probably. So, Iran's pissed about all of this. Iran's not had a great last 6 months or so. They've had leaders taken out. Their attacks on Israel when they sent 300 rockets in from Iran all got shot down but in a coordinated effort between Jordan and us and Israel and some other countries. So Iran's not looking great right now. Israel has penetrated sort of every level of their security and has shown that they're fully capable of doing that and carrying out attacks. And Iran looks like they can't do that. But that doesn't stop Iran from trying. So as mentioned, they're pretty pissed off, and it should be noted, they want to assassinate Donald Trump. So they actually have a dog in this race that we are going to vote for in November. The Justice Department has been investigating multiple potential assassination attempts in retaliation specifically for the killing of Soleimani in 2020, which was under Trump. So they've made specific threats on Trump, Mike Pompeo, and John Bolton. And Trump's team was actually just recently briefed about the nature of those threats. And they're serious. I mean, Iran trying to assassinate a former president and current guy running for president, that's a pretty big deal. There were some rumors that flew around that the Butler shooting was potentially hired via Iran. There's no evidence that happened. There's no evidence that any of the 2 attempts on Donald Trump's life were actually to do with Iran at all. However, Justice Department did arrest I think it was a Pakistani national who had close ties to Iran in August for alleged plots against leaders. They did not specify. They're kind of tiptoeing around who the leaders were, but we can safely assume it was someone like Trump or John Bolton. We know John Bolton and Mike Pompeo still have support of security because of those threats. So this is serious. Iran, they're bad dudes. And the truth is the next president is going to have to deal with Iran. Like, it's getting worse and worse. So, for example, this quote is from Noah Rothman on National Review. Some things transcend domestic politics. A foreign threat like this one is one of those things. Whoever wins this election will have to contend with the Iranian menace. We can deduce from recent developments that a Trump presidency would take seriously the need to contain Iranian aggression. If the Biden White House's response to the threat against Trump is any indication, we have no such assurances about Kamala Harris. I think that's pretty fair. To me, it's not gotten enough attention that a foreign country is trying to assassinate a former president in the United States. I just feel like we'd be getting more news stories if it was Barack Obama that they were trying to go after. I don't like Trump. We've talked about this. If you've paid attention to me for any amount of time, I don't think he's a good leader. I don't think he's fit to be president. I don't wish for him to be assassinated by a foreign dictatorship. That would be bad for everyone. And so I think we should take this stuff very seriously. We've already had 2 near assassination attempts on Trump's life in just the last couple months by who are essentially crazy people. It seems like both of the assassins or would-be assassins were clearly not mentally stable, not all there. So what could a foreign country that's actually got a plan and could be diligent about it, what could they do? That scares me, especially with the Secret Service failures that we've seen in the last few months with the Trump assassination attempts. So I think this is a situation where Iran is dangerously close to getting a nuclear weapon. And yeah, why have I shifted to Iran? It's because Iran is the reason all of this is going on in the Middle East. Iran is they are the cause of the problems in the Middle East for the most part. Not that there aren't other problems, but it's Iran's hatred of us and Israel. They call us the great Satan. They call Israel the little Satan. They want to eliminate both of us, okay? They are funding Hezbollah. They are funding Hamas. They are funding the Houthis, who are dealing with the shipping lanes in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. This is all Iran. Everything goes back to Iran. So Biden and Obama, for some reason, desperately wanted some sort of peace deal with Iran where they, the nuclear deal. These are bad deals. We influxed them with a ton of cash that they then used to fund terrorism. I don't like Biden or Obama's policy on Iran. Biden is scared to death to escalate things with Iran instead of it being the other way around. Iran should be scared to escalate stuff with us. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it is a totally different game. And so I think we should do what we have to do to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. From the stuff I've read and the people I've listened to, Israel does not have the capability to take out the Iranian nuclear program. Don't know that for sure. Like I said, these are just some people I'm listening to on podcasts and paying attention to, but we could. But if we do that, you're in it then. And I think Americans are very hesitant to get into another war in the Middle East, understandably so, because Iraq and Afghanistan didn't go great. So I get it. I understand the sentiment. I am also hesitant to get into a war in the Middle East. But something has to happen with Iran. Something will happen with Iran under this next president. It's almost inevitable. Something. I'm not saying we're going to be in World War III. I'm not saying we're going to be in direct war with our soldiers fighting Iranian soldiers. But this is escalating. And this is, I think, the most important job the president has, is foreign policy. They're the ones that are going to get woken up in the middle of the night and say, what are we doing about this? They're the people that are going to have to make the decision of what kind of weapons we give our allies. What are the limitations on those? But it's pretty obvious who Iran prefers in the White House. They're trying to assassinate Trump. So they obviously would prefer Harris in the White House, just like they prefer Biden, because Biden's been kind of feckless against them. I do think Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East specifically was quite good. I don't think he's the best at foreign policy. I don't think he even really cares about it. I think that's actually why he was successful, is because he offloaded it to people who cared about it and who were good at the job and just got out of their way because he didn't care enough about it. That's fine. I would take that. I am very skeptical of Kamala Harris's foreign policy chops. I'm not sure she has any. If she's scared to do an interview with friendly press, I don't understand how she's going to get into a room with Vladimir Putin or or the Ayatollah of Iran or these Hezbollah leaders. I don't understand how like she's going to negotiate that if she has trouble doing a friendly interview. It just doesn't seem. Maybe it's different if the camera's off. I don't know. I mean, I've not seen anything that makes me go, yes, she seems to have a good head on her shoulders about foreign policy. Now, she's better on some stuff when we get to Ukraine, maybe. But with Israel specifically, I just feel like Biden and Harris have supported Israel, and they've given even vocal support to it. But I also feel like they've been more critical of Israel in their every move than they ever have of Ukraine, for example. And to me, that shows some cards. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But again, it just seems like they always hedge with there's all these civilian casualties and Israel has to do better and et cetera. But they don't mention that like Hamas has to be eliminated for anything to work going forward. I've just not heard that out of Kamala Harris's mouth, that Hamas has to be eliminated. I think that's imperative. And Hezbollah may end up being the same thing, although it at least appears that neither Hezbollah or Israel really want an all-out war to break out here, because it would be bad. A lot of people would die. A lot of IDF force would die, and they're already stretched thin in a two-front kind of situation. A lot of civilians would die. A lot of Lebanese would die unnecessarily just because a terrorist group helps sort of run part of their country. These are problems. I do not have any solutions for, but they are worth paying attention to because we're going to elect a president that's going to have to deal with this stuff. I'm not convinced that either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump would be great at foreign policy. I've not heard anything out of their mouth other than, we'll just solve it, or sort of some platitudes about, it just, none of it is, there's no substance there. And I don't expect in a presidential debate, for example, for someone to be able to answer that question in a way in 2 minutes that makes me go, okay, great. I feel great about this. That's a great solution for the conflict in Israel. But I do expect some ideas, some ideals, some principles, we're always going to stand with our allies. We're going to give them what they need. I just feel like we're hedging too much, and both people are just kind of saying what they think everyone wants to hear, and they're trying to make everyone happy. And the truth is, these are not situations where you can make everyone happy. These are situations where people are going to die. That's the simple truth, is that these decisions that the president makes, we ask them to make decisions that we don't have to. And a lot of times those decisions end in innocent civilians losing their lives. That's a lot of weight for someone to do. I don't begrudge it, which is why I don't want to be the president of the United States. That sounds like a lot of, it's a heavy burden. And we should think carefully about who we're going to give that burden to. I just think that's worth it. But I do think I want to give Trump some credit, because I do feel like his Middle East specific foreign policy stuff, the Abraham Accords, we were certainly on the way, to normalizing relations between like Saudi Arabia and Israel and Jordan and Israel, and some of these people that have realized this constant trying to eliminate Israel has not been good for our countries. And people are starting to come around to that. And Iran obviously wants to throw a big old wrench in the gears of that, and sort of successfully did with the Hamas attacks on October 7th. So it's a complicated situation, but keep paying attention to it. I think it's worth doing, and find some smart people to read. Again, check out the show notes if you want some of those articles. Maybe find someone that you follow and can pay attention to. So let's move on to Ukraine. Not really so much talking about the actual conflict that's going on in Ukraine, but more so about their president Zelensky's visit to the U.S. this week. So he's here for a meeting at the UN General Assembly, which is in New York, but he also visited a munitions plant in Pennsylvania that's providing some of the artillery for the war. This is where the fight breaks out. If you haven't heard, Pennsylvania is a swing state, and the entire election will probably hinge on Pennsylvania's outcome. It seems like whoever wins Pennsylvania will win the White House. So him showing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Joe's hometown, I don't think is an accident. I also think that it wouldn't have happened if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris said, hey, that actually looks a little too much like a foreign leader trying to influence a U.S. election. Because again, sometimes it's not so much that something is illegal or wrong, it's that you got to keep up the appearance of that it's not. And Trump was impeached for doing a similar situation, a sort of quid pro quo. We'll give you some military assets if you give me dirt on Joe Biden. And the reason that was impeachable is because it didn't benefit. It was taxpayer money going to a country in return for something that didn't benefit the citizens of the country, it just benefited one guy, Donald Trump. So, I think that impeachment was valid on the merits. As far as I wish we would impeach more people for this kind of stuff. I think every president should probably be impeached at some point or another by Congress, just so that Congress kind of whips them into shape a little bit and says, we actually have some checks on you and we are the more powerful branch of government. I think that would be a good thing, but that's a whole different tangent. The point is, Zelensky's here because he's also asking Biden, and he's meeting with Harris and he's meeting with Trump about specifically what they want to be able to do is they want the ability and permission to strike further into Russia. We've given them weapons with the express rules that they cannot fire them into Russia because we don't want this to escalate into, well, if we're giving you rockets and you're firing them at Russia, is Russia going to blame us for that attack? We are much more careful about this than anyone else. China's just giving Russia stuff. And China, Russia, and Iran, and North Korea, they love to work together. They're happy to work together and sow all sorts of chaos in the world because they want to be the world leaders. And so I just think we're not being those leaders well enough. But that's what Zelensky wants. He wants to be able to fire these rockets further into Russian territory to take out military targets, which I think is a legitimate ask. I'm open to the debate that we should or shouldn't give them that permission to do so. If it turns out that in a couple weeks, Biden gives them that ability, right after he shows up in Pennsylvania, essentially with Josh Shapiro, the governor of of Pennsylvania, and some other politicians that are running for elected office right now, and does this tour of this facility, it's legitimate enough, but a few weeks before the election, gosh, it really does look bad. And I don't understand what the difference is between foreign interference in our elections when it's Russia doing it covertly. I mean, at least this is Zelensky in public doing it. It's all out in the open, allegedly. But I think it's worth asking the questions. Like, what is going on here? Is there any sort of quid pro quo here? Because to me, what would be the difference? I know what Democrats would say to it. They would say, and even Zelensky would probably say this, is, well, look, this is a country's existence possibly hanging in the balance. So I understand Zelensky doesn't care. He will put his thumb on the scale for U.S. elections if he thinks Trump will be bad for his country. That's his job. And that is foreign leaders' job, is to come here and ask for things. They're going to do this at the UN. They do it to Congress. They do it to presidents. Like I said, it's just the going to Pennsylvania part that makes me go, oh, that's just a little, maybe a step too far. I wish he wouldn't have done it. If for no other reason, just for the sake of, I think every time something like this happens, we give the Trumpiest MAGA wing of the party and the country an excuse to say, when they lose in November, if that happens, well, they're going to point to the debate moderators and say they were unfair in fact-checking Trump, but not Kamala Harris. They're going to say Zelensky came over here and basically did a campaign event in Pennsylvania for the Democrats. And they're going to go, what's any different than, Democrats were crying foul about 2016 Russia interference. How is that not interference? And I think that some of those claims are going to be, I don't want to say legitimate. They're not going to explain away, because Trump, if he loses, he and his followers are going to pretend that it was rigged. They did it in 2020. They said they were going to do it in 2016. He just happened to win. They did it in 2020. They've done it ever since. Trump still won't admit the election wasn't stolen from him in 2020. And so now they're just lining up excuses why it won't be. And I'll do an episode in the next few weeks about election security because I think that's going to be an important thing to talk about because it's on a lot of people's minds. So I just don't want to give them any more ammunition. But I understand why Zelensky's doing it. I understand why he's here. I understand that he goes, look, my country hangs in the balance of this. It might not be able to exist if Trump gets elected and goes, no more funding. What would they do? And these are important questions too, because does that mean Europe becomes the default kind of world leaders in these kind of conflicts and we're no longer part of it? Are we just going to be totally isolationist if Trump gets elected? I think these are questions that are worth asking. I just don't know that we have... I don't know that we have the answers because Trump is clearly doesn't care that much about policy, and he's saying things, but he's not really. I don't feel like he's really pinned down on a policy. I think he's just saying, "Oh, I'll have it solved," but he doesn't really have a policy. I don't know that he really cares. I think most of his hate of Ukraine is just a personal vendetta for the first impeachment. I think that's what this really all boils down to, and I don't love that. I think we should support Ukraine because in the 90s we signed a thing that said, "Hey, if you get rid of your nuclear weapons, we will back you if Russia tries to attack you." So I think we got to be people of our word. Even without that, though, I think that just bordering a NATO country. If Russia blows through Ukraine, it will involve our troops on the ground in NATO countries, no matter what, even if Russia doesn't go further into a NATO country. But if Russia steps foot and starts invading Poland, I mean, we are obligated to support our NATO allies. I've said it before on the show, say it again. Do you know who the only country is who has needed NATO support and has called for it since World War II? It's us after the September 11th attacks. That's it. No other country's ever had to use. We've never had to implement NATO in that way. So we've benefited from it. I hope we don't abandon our allies. They didn't abandon us. So I think that's important stuff. And I also think this does, people always ask me, well, what's the interest that U.S. has in Ukraine? And I think that's it, is that if we let Russia blow through Ukraine without doing anything, and now they're on the border of a NATO country in Europe, if they choose to do the same thing there, we will have to send troops. We will lose lives. And I don't want us to do that. I'd like to avoid having to defend Poland or Europe or things like that. Obviously, we will if it comes to it. But I want to avoid that war happening. And I think that right now, we're trying to keep that from happening. We're trying to not be involved. We're just trying to send weapons in Israel, Gaza, Hamas, all that stuff. Trying to do the same thing. But the truth is Biden's foreign policy has been bad. I don't think it's been good at all. I think that he's been kind of like Obama, sort of saying, here's the red line, and then people cross it, and then he doesn't do anything about it. I also think he's just got the wrong idea about how to deal with Iran. I just think that the policy has not worked, has not contained Iran. We've only had an escalation of all of these things under Biden, not under Trump. So I don't think he's been good at foreign policy. I don't think he has totally the right deal even with Ukraine. Biden's administration and Harris are more correct on Ukraine than Trump is. However, Biden has hamstrung them. They asked for F-16s, and it took us like 8 months to decide, should we give them to them? Should we not? We don't want to escalate stuff. They've asked for all sorts of different kinds of munitions that we have, and we've gone, I don't know, that could be. Look, we either need to support like all the way 100%, because to me, the message that we have to send as Americans, and this is it, this is what it all boils down to. If you are our ally, if we say we're going to have your back, we are going to 100% have your back. And the reason we're going to do that is because it's deterrence. We want everyone that's going to attack one of our allies that we've said we have their back. If they do so, we want them to get hammered by the full force of either our military or our weaponry or our technology or our intelligence, whatever it is. If we do anything short of that, it makes our backing of these countries not worth anything. Because one, a bunch of countries are wondering, will the United States really back us? I know they said they're going to, but I mean, they're even kind of dancing around, should we do this? Should we send Ukraine what they ask for? Do we need to add strings to this thing we're sending Israel? Or do we back them up 100%? So there's that part of it. And then there's the second part. Our enemies need to know that if they mess with one of our friends, they're also messing with us. And to me, it's a little bit obvious. I think Trump has a very valid point here when he points out that George W. Bush, Russia invades Ukraine. Under Barack Obama, they invade Ukraine. They don't under Trump. There's no Russia action inside of Ukraine while Trump's president. Biden becomes president, full-on invasion of Ukraine. They were little areas, Crimea and Donbass and these other places earlier. So for the last 4 presidents, only one of them has not had a Russian incursion into Ukraine. That might be coincidence. I don't know. Trump's administration was actually very tough on Russia. I know most people don't believe that when I say it, but he really was. If you look at the tariffs and all the kind of sanctions and things that went on with Russia, the administration was very tough on Russia, much more so than Obama was. Because Obama, remember, laughed off Mitt Romney in 2012 for saying Russia might be our biggest adversary. He said, what the Cold War the 80s called, they want their Cold War back or something like that, and or foreign policy back. And he was wrong. Russia was absolutely trying to gear up to be another. They want the Soviet Union back together. That's what they're trying to do. And so I don't think this is going to be over. I don't think that Russia's going to go into Ukraine and just be happy with that either. I think they want to get the whole band back together. And they may go further than that. So these are just the two most obvious and currently, being fought wars. But we're on the brink with China throughout Asia. Every week I see a story about China incurring in someone's airspace in Japan or something. And we've got Iran on other fronts too. We've got Russia potentially creeping into NATO territories. Not to mention there's civil wars all over, including in countries that are just below us. There's a lot of turmoil going on in Central and South America, hence sending a lot of migrants up here. So America, I think, still has a role in the world. I would love to have that discussion of what it should be. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have a conversation about, should we be more isolationist? Should we not be? Are there benefits to doing these proxy wars? Does it really save American lives? Let's have those discussions. I think that the reason foreign policy is, voters tend to not really care about foreign policy because I think it is complicated and we've failed to learn about it. And if we don't learn about it, we're not going to be well-informed voters on even telling our representatives what we desire out of this. That's okay in some regards. I think part of the reason we elect these officials, the reason we elect a president, the reason we elect congressmen and senators who sit on these committees and deal with foreign stuff is because they are going to be better at taking those details, taking all the information and then making a decision on it. National Security Council, things like that, where you've got 15 people who are elected that get to sit there and talk about these kind of stuff. And from my understanding, the ones that don't have cameras in Congress get a lot of stuff done, and there's a lot of bipartisan support, and they're taking it very seriously, and they're not doing the performative stuff that we see everyone do on every other committee inside of Congress. So I'm fine also with Americans being like, you know what, I'm going to trust you on foreign policy because you gave me some good answers when we asked you questions at a debate or whatever, and I'm going to trust you on it. And I'm not going to worry myself with it. I think that's a fine way to look at foreign policy. There's enough to try to learn on just domestic stuff. So I understand why people don't like foreign policy. I just think it's important to jump into it every once in a while. I'm not a foreign policy reading guy all the time. It's not my favorite thing. I much prefer to read stuff about economics and policy in America. But foreign policy is very, very important. I think it's very important to start paying attention to it now because there's just a lot going on in the world. And I think that we will either be trying to prevent World War III or be in World War III in the next 4 years. I know that sounds like a stupid prediction because obviously one of those things will be true, right? So it's a dumb prediction, but you know what I mean. I mean that the next president either has a lot of work to do to avoid that conflict or will be in the middle of that conflict. And the truth is you can never straight line project, okay, well, this happened today, so what's going to happen next? There are always surprises with this stuff. So do we trust the next president that we're electing to be able to roll with those punches? Are they going to be prepared for an October 7th like attack or, God forbid, a terrorist attack on our soil or an assassination of one of our leaders by a foreign country? Are they prepared for any of these scenarios? I don't know. Like, are they going to be able to make the decision in the moment when that happens of what's the next step? These are really important things. And I think that history is full of examples of people making the wrong decision and that changing the course of history. And frankly, the reason I don't think Trump or Kamala Harris are worthy of the position of the presidency is because I don't think they're up to that task. I've seen no evidence that either one of them are great at that task. Now, like I said, to be fair, Kamala Harris is only vice president, so she doesn't actually have the same control that Biden does, but I've not seen her be some sort of foreign policy expert in her 4 years as vice president. I've not seen any real big wins from the Biden administration when it comes to foreign policy, and I will give Trump credit that there was some better foreign policy under him in some regards. But the way he's talking now is nothing like what he actually did in his first term. I think he would just let Ukraine go to waste. I think he would just let Russia take over it if he had his way. And I think it's really just for a vendetta and for nothing else. I've not seen any evidence. He's not laid out a good enough argument for me to go, okay, I see where he's coming from. So it'd be great if Trump did that. I'm not expecting him to. but maybe we'll hear from some other surrogates. And that's really what you're going to hear right now. You're not going to hear from Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on this. You're going to hear from their vice presidential candidates or other elected senators and congresspeople. This is not their forte. Quite frankly, they're not very good at this. I think it's because they've not really thought it out. And to be fair, Trump hired good people the first time. I'm not sure he will this next time. So I think that is worth talking about, because the world seems to be increasingly dividing itself into democracies and dictatorships. And the dictatorships are working well together, and I'm not sure the democracies are as well, because we're fighting with, should we give Ukraine funding? And there's a bunch of people here that are anti-Israel, and there's a bunch of people that are anti-NATO in the Republican Party. And so, you're seeing these frays happening with the good guys. Meanwhile, the bad guys are all working very well together. They're not fighting amongst themselves. They're working with each other to defeat us. And I think it's very important that we pay attention to that. So that's it for me. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with me. I really do appreciate it. For this election season, I'm releasing a short video every day counting down until the election with information that I think might be important to voters like you to consider. If you find one that adds value to a political conversation you may have with a friend or family member or something, please share it. You can find them on YouTube or Instagram. If you follow me on either one of those platforms, it's the exact same video on both places. It's a lot easier to send people messages on Instagram, though. Hint, hint. So maybe follow on Instagram. If you find one that like sits with you and you go, oh yeah, that's a good point, I'm going to send that to my mom. We were talking about this the other day. That helps me grow. Really, there's the way to grow a political show, just to let you in on a little hint here, is to be outrageous and fear-mongering. And I don't want to do that. I want to do a different kind of political content. And so the algorithm just doesn't reward me as much for being like, yeah, well, this guy's kind of bad and that guy's kind of bad, and there's really nothing outrageous about this. You don't get rewarded for that with clicks and eyeballs. So you got to share, because that's how people hear about this show. So really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing stuff. I will catch you next time.